What's going on, everybody, and welcome to Justice for the series. And tonight we have a very important case. And so we have to ask the question, how does a 17-year-old get found rolled up in a gym mat in a school and the case is ruled an accident? How does that happen? 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson was found head down, rolled in a wrestling mat in a high school gymnasium. The official cause of death, positional asphyxia. The family disputes vehemently that ruling. An independent autopsy found different conclusions. A federal civil rights review later declined prosecution. How did we get here? Well, tonight, spokesperson for the Kendrick Johnson family joins us and we ask the hard questions about this case. Let's get to it.
What do you want?
Every headline fades. Every news cycle moves on. For the families, it never ends. And the fight for accountability continues. This is not about clicks. This is not about controversy. This is about the truth. The names that deserves justice. We are reopening and examining the files and the facts. Nothing more and nothing less. We're going to ask questions that people dare to ask. Because justice delayed does not mean justice denied.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Can't fail me.
You don't get
This is Justice for.
Welcome to Justice for the series where we dive into the difficult cases and ask difficult questions. I'm attorney Gerald Griggs, a justice fighter, and I'm honored to be joined by my co-host, Kiandria Demone.
Hi, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate you, Griggs, for bringing us in. So tonight we're talking about Kendrick Johnson. Now, this is one of the cases when it comes to civil rights and social justice that has been heartbreaking for a lot of people and has left a lot of people shook because there's so much debate surrounding this case.
Absolutely. It's one of those cases where if you're from Georgia, if you've been around social justice for any amount of time, you've heard about this case out of Valdosta, Lowndes County. And tonight we are honored to have a member of the Kendrick Johnson close confidant, their spokesperson, a civil rights activist in his own right, Mr. John Burris. Welcome to the show. We have some questions and we want to make sure that we honor the wishes of the family. So we're honored to have you here. Introduce yourself to the people.
Well, Gerald, thank you for having me. My name is Jonathan R. Burrs, and I am the family spokesperson and civil rights advocate for the family of Kendrick Johnson. And I initially got involved with this case maybe 4 months after it happened, and spoke to Jackie on the phone. And just told her, hey, I apologize for getting to the fight late, because I was on a team that, that was after, Kendrick happened after Trayvon. And so there was a lot of things about the Trayvon case and some corruption, a lot of corruption that they basically used Trayvon's case to get legislation through for this stand your ground, in all these different states. So then Kendrick's case came up, and I got a hold of Jackie, and then we met in person at a Trayvon Martin rally in Miami Gardens. It was when Jamie Foxx was there, Michael Basin came down, Ben Crump, we did the whole rally thing there. And, we just kept fighting together. We just fought together the whole time for this 13 years. And then 3 years ago at the 10th rally, Kenneth Johnson, he came over to me and said, hey, Jonathan, how what are these things, these processes that they should be going through in court? And then he started to explain to me what was actually happening. They had 7 cases filed in between state and federal court.
Well, before we jump into that, could you briefly get our listeners up to speed on what happened from the beginning, and then we'll go into the legal process. So, can you just start from how Kendrick ended up in the gym?
Well, he walked into the gym, and where they want you to believe the story begins is that they found him inside the gym mat. However, all the evidence that they collected would suggest otherwise. And that shot right there, you can see Kendrick is just walking down, nonchalant. He's not looking over his shoulder. He's not worried about anything. And if you there's a little exchange between one of the black kids and the white boy in that clip that you just showed, and you can see there may have been a weapon or something passed off to one of the kids when Kendrick walked by in that clip that you just showed. Anyway, so the story is that Kendrick was found inside this mat. The official claim is he accidentally fell, reaching for a shoe, 6 feet down. Kendrick's 5'9". His arms clearly are not that long. Reaching for a shoe that the school claims that, hey, the kids store these shoes inside the mats. And their normal method of retrieval is to tip it from the bottom and take it out. But this particular day, Kendrick decides to get on top of the mat and reach 6 feet down, and he accidentally fell inside of a opening that was 14 inches wide. And Kendrick had almost 19-inch shoulders width. And he fell with such velocity that he just disappeared. And no one saw him fall into this mat, reaching for this shoe that was 6 feet down, and suffocated. Now,
So can I ask you something? I'm
sure.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I want to
problem.
ask the circumstances surrounding, let's just say we're entertaining that theory or the conclusion that he climbed up into the mat, he fell. How isolated or empty, to your knowledge, is this facility to where no one heard that sound? Or what does that look like as far as witnesses who might have been nearby, because this is a gym, right? So if there are students occupying it, I would think that there were other people around.
It's scientifically impossible what the story is. So if you entertain it from a scientific approach, a forensics approach, it is impossible. And so the story changed. The story changed drastically from the first time they told it to the time that Dr. Kraft gave a deposition. And I mean, it changed from he was reaching for a shoe that was at the bottom, that he was instead reaching for a shoe that was stuck at the top of the mat. And as he reached further in, the mat opened wider and the shoe went further in, and then Kendrick went further in behind him. And so she describes a gym mat that's rolled up as concave on the inside, when in reality, those mats have, they put tubes in them when they roll them up, so it's not going to be concave. So the story is scientifically impossible.
Yeah.
No matter which way you look at it.
And let's back it up a little bit for those who don't know the story. We are talking about an event that happened in 2013 at a Lowndes County High School, where high school student Kendrick Johnson, 17, was alleged to have rolled himself up in a gym mat. We were talking about the inability for this to happen, and I want to add a few more facts in here. Uh, from what I've read, Kendrick was about 70 inches tall, which means he's about 5'9", 5'10", and about 160 pounds. And he's supposed to have rolled himself up in this gym mat of his own accord. Now, you talked about the story changing from one pathologist to the next. Are we talking about the first pathologist or the second? Kind of fill us in with those facts so people can get a full picture of what you're saying.
What we're talking about is the Georgia State Medical Examiner who changed this whole story. She changed her story and her testimony to fit a narrative that almost was consistent with the narrative the sheriff department initially put forward after they changed their story 2 or 3 times because they kept trying to cover up for different oversights and inconsistencies. And that pattern is followed and documented all the way through.
Okay.
So I have a question. Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead,
was gonna say,
Griggs.
so let's parse that out. Initially, what was the statement of the sheriff's department with regard to their initial findings? I know we have a copy of the police report, but what do you recall the sheriff's department's initial report as with this case?
Well, Lieutenant Stride Jones at the time, currently Stride Jones is the chief of police in Hahira, Georgia. He was a lieutenant and the chief investigator, primary investigator for the Lowndes County, the sheriff's department. And according to Stride Jones, Mr. Jones, Kendrick, it was a big accident. He fell inside of a gym mat that had an opening of roughly 24 inches. So well wide enough for Kendrick's 19 inches to drop through, right? But they ran into a problem because none of the other gym mats had 24 inches width. They had 14. So then they had to change the story to fit that narrative, and they hadn't really checked what size Kendrick's shoulders were. And so when we brought that up, the story changed again to the shoe instead being at the bottom of the mat. Being at the bottom of the mat, it was 2 shoes. And the 2 shoes together got stuck in the top of the mat. And he was reaching for them and they got it's changed a bunch. The mocked up diagram that they put in the sheriff's department release showed Kendrick reaching into a mat with the 2 shoes at the very bottom of the mat.
Do
Then
we have
Dr.
that
Craft,
diagram?
We do.
yeah, it's all in the lawsuits and stuff.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, that one there. And
So,
it's so you
so
see 2 shoes.
kind of describe, because some of the people are be listening to this or be listening on the podcast, and will just be audio. So kind of describe what we're seeing on the screen.
So this is these are mocked up diagrams of how the sheriff's department claimed it happened. That this Kendrick was reaching for this. Now, let me just say this right off the bat. There is no scientific evidence or anything that they collected at the crime scene that would support or even suggest that this is how it happened. Not one thing. And so for all intents purposes, and what we're calling this is a fraudulent diagram. And under Georgia state law, this is a felony because it's changed from multiple times. From when this diagram was made, it was intended to fit Dr. Kraft's 2019 testimony. This diagram was made sometime in 2021 when Sheriff Polk did a second investigation by the Lowndes County Sheriff's Department. And then in 2022, he released the synopsis, the 2022 synopsis of that investigation. And that's when they opened the door for what you see today. Because as you know, in a conspiracy, the statute of limitations runs from the last overt act.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because we're still kind of going into the initial conversation about what the initial story was. I have some questions about, how they even got here. So we saw the surveillance footage of Kendrick walking through the halls at the high school. Was there no surveillance footage inside the gym to show what actually happened?
There's absolutely was surveillance in the gym, and a consultant that CNN had hired. They got all of the video surveillance. He, under the Freedom of Information Act request, he is he's a consultant at Quantico. So that's what he does for a living. And he found 1.5 to 2 hours of surveillance just gone. And then there were others. Yeah. The time that Kendrick was last seen.
Can I
And
ask
then
you
there
something?
was, sure.
Because I want to make sure, because I know a lot of people like myself, like this was more than 10 years ago. So I was a lot younger when it happened. So I wasn't deep diving into cases like this. So if we can, if you don't mind sharing like these things that you're talking about, like the surveillance footage missing, where if somebody wants to see that or research that themselves, where can they find that now if we don't have that to put up on the screen?
You can do a Freedom of Information Act request to the FBI and ask for all of Kendrick Johnson's case files. There's
Okay.
at least 3 case files. And it's interesting you'd ask that point because the only person that they won't send this to, it seems, is the Kendrick Johnson family. And we got around that by having other people do it. And then they got it. And now we have additional incriminating information, and that kind of really points to layers and layers and layers of corruption, and I mean all the way up as far as it goes.
Let me ask you this: since the family was able to get now the case files from the FBI and the GBI,
Well, they don't have the case files. Operatives for the family have the case files going through them, and then we get the most incriminating things. So the KJ team is very broad. They
So
have
y'all
people
are
helping them
combing
all
through
over the
it.
country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the team, so they been able to put together from the evidence what is more likely to have happened than this story that continues to shift from him reaching for one shoe or reaching for 2 shoes or some kind of way rolling himself up into the gym mat.
The evidence, the forensic evidence that was collected by the Lowndes County Sheriff's Department, the evidence and pictures that was taken by the GBI, the independent consulting or forensic pathologist autopsy are conclusive. We know exactly what happened to Kendrick. We're not speculating. Kendrick was jumped inside the locker room by at least 2 people. At some point, Kendrick hit one of these kids that assaulted him in the mouth. Tooth mark is in his knuckle. Kendrick was then shot with a 2-pronged stun gun in the right side of his on his right side. Then he was hit over the head with a hard object that left a skull fracture in his head. There's a hematoma on top of his head. And when his body fell to the ground, he was stomped from every direction. There's a shoe print across his abdomen and another shoe print up the side. So we know exactly what happened to Kendrick. And during the course of this stomping, they also ruptured his carotid artery. And we have pictures of the hemorrhage inside the carotid artery. So we know exactly what happened to Kendrick.
So let me ask you this, because I did want us to back up a little bit because we got into the actual altercation or his actual death, but I want to talk a little bit more about the circumstances surrounding it. Not that I wouldn't say anybody would have a motive to harm a 17-year-old boy, but you said something. You said he had gotten into a fight. So let's talk to your knowledge. Backstory. What does the backstory look like? Because I feel like in these cases, too often they're like, whoops, it was an accident. But the reality is he's had a whole altercation or a beef with somebody else. And we should be questioning that. We should be asking about those circumstances. So talk to us a little bit about that to your knowledge.
So what I can say unequivocally that there is a deposition from a student, and she tells the story that he was jumped, he got in a fight, and he got in a fight, he was winning, and as a result, someone picked something up and hit him in the head with it. And all of the forensics corroborate that happening. I mean, that's what happened. And that's in deposition. It's a affidavit, I mean.
Yeah, and kind of talking through that with the backstory leads me into the questions about the three medical examiners report, specifically the second one that says that there was some sort of blunt force trauma to his head. And you can see it's on the screen right now. So, am I correct in saying that the family got an independent medical examiner who found that there was evidence of a blunt force trauma to his head?
The William Anderson is a nationally renowned forensic pathologist. The family, he's out of Florida. They wanted to get someone outside the state of Georgia, and so he absolutely found so he didn't find to the head because Kendrick's brain was removed. All right, his brain was gone. That's why in the picture, one picture, there's a crease across his forehead. His brain was removed because there was a skull fracture. So they took all of that. The forensic pathologist found the ruptured carotid artery because they clearly couldn't take that, but all his other internal organs were gone, including his tongue. They cut that out. I mean, everything.
Let me ask you this, right while you're saying that, because I'm curious because there has been a lot of speculation about his organs, where they went. To your knowledge, again, like after speaking with the family or knowing their story or from their account, is this something they were made aware of as it was happening? Is it something they consented to? Because this is a child, and I know personally that when it comes to autopsies and organs, anything we're taking out or moving, that's to be approved by next of kin. So, like, to your knowledge, is that something that his next of kin and family was made aware of while it was happening, or was it more so a shock to find it later on?
The family was shocked to find that his internal organs were missing. And there are documented conflicting accounts of what happened. The sheriff's department claims that the internal organs were disposed of by the medical examiner because they had advanced decomposition. And the medical examiner says she put the organs back inside Kendrick and sent it with the body, returned it to the family with the body. Now, here's the catch. The medical examiner's deposition, where she gave this testimony, was in 2019. The sheriff department made their claim in their 2022 investigation synopsis. So how is it that they investigated and concluded that these organs were disposed of by the medical examiner when the medical examiner had a testimony in place for 3 years that says she sent them back?
And let's talk about that. The sheriff did release a statement not only about the organs, but about what led up to this situation where they alleged that Kendrick had rolled himself up in a mat. And of
Yeah.
course, you alleged that he was beaten and jumped. And that's where we're trying to get to the bottom of what actually happened. But what in fact was it that the sheriff concluded?
The sheriff concluded that it was just an accident, a freak accident, that, they had Kendrick and some other student had an altercation on a bus, but it was no big deal. And everyone was in their class and accounted for when Kendrick went missing. And that there were so many federal or government agencies involved that it couldn't possibly be a conspiracy. Gaslighting, that was everything official was gaslighting and covering up. They didn't use all of the evidence and pictures that they took, they didn't report on that evidence. They said just the opposite.
And so, kind of going into the evidence, did they ever say that they had statements from anybody or any corroboration of their particular version of events? Because it's kind of curious to me that you say he was the only one in the gym.
No, that's not what they said. They said there were other kids in the gym. And so the stories change. Yeah, the other kids were in the gym, and during the course of this, he fell inside this mat, like I said, with such velocity that no one saw him fall. So, and again, the initial story was that the mat opening was 24 inches wide. And that was probably, for their narrative, they were fitting it because someone had placed Kendrick's body in there and rolled it up, and the mat probably was 24 inches wide at that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So here's the question I have, and I'm sure many of the viewers have. So if there were children or people in the gym, did people actually testify in any of these cases that they saw Kendrick reaching for shoes or two?
None whatsoever. There is nothing. No, the kids said the exact opposite. And they were hushed. None of them were allowed to talk. They were intimidated, as far as I know. That's what I hear. But what I've seen as far as what got documented, the students, what they said is what you see. What the GBI said conflicts with what you see. What Sheriff Polk says conflicts with what you see.
So I guess one of the other things that I find curious in this whole situation is if we go with what the sheriff's office and others are saying from law enforcement, how did he get those serious injuries to his body if he accidentally fell into a gym mat?
The cameras broke.
So they don't know.
No, so in court they just ignore it. They just ignore it. Like all the evidence. The judge has never referred to any exhibits in any of their filings. Yeah, they just they just ignore it.
So
It's
this is
like
the
you're
question
sitting
I
in the
have.
room in 1842, you know, and white people around the table eating, and they don't see you. You're not there. It just doesn't exist.
So I have a question, just to piggyback off of what you said, Griggs. So correct me if I'm wrong. The autopsy report that while we were reading over it, there's evidence of blunt force trauma, right? Like to his head, right?
Yeah.
And so the photos we've seen, that's what it appears to be also, blunt force trauma to his head. So my question would be, and now I'm no scientist, I'm no doctor, but if he fell hard enough to have caused that blunt force trauma to his head, just his head, like there were no other broken bones, no collarbone, no shoulders, arms. If he was reaching, wouldn't that arm or fingers have been broken as well if he fell that hard? Like
Well,
if we think
see,
about it, wouldn't he in theory have fallen first on that arm? So what does that look like?
so again, this is another scientific impossibility, and I can actually speak to this from a personal experience playing basketball. I was trying out for varsity, went up, block a shot, got undercut, came down on the back of my head. Uh, Concussion, knocked completely out. Um, Bounced off the floor, convulsions and everything. No broken bones,
But
no
no
skull
blunt force
fracture,
trauma.
no blunt force trauma. I, I walked out of the hospital that night. I mean, so no broken neck.
Doesn't blunt force trauma, now again, I'm no doctor, so correct me if I'm wrong. Doesn't blunt force trauma indicate an object, like an isolated object? And would a fall be blunt force trauma? A
A
fall
fall
isn't
could
blunt force trauma,
a
right?
fall could be blunt force trauma,
Okay.
but again, you'd have to hit yourself. You'd have
In
to
one specific spot though.
and fall pretty hard.
Hard. Okay.
So going through a gym mat, and I kind of figured how that would work. If Kendrick, you drop his body off of a 3-story building or maybe higher, it might generate enough velocity to go through this mat. But the diagram that you showed, he was crawling. So from the belly position, again, it's scientifically impossible to fall through a 14-inch opening with 19-inch shoulders from the belly position with such velocity that you just slip and disappear.
Right.
Doesn't happen.
With no sound, with all of those individuals that are in the gym at the time.
And that's
So
why Dr. Kraft changed her narrative and invented a new one to try to cover up for that screw up.
here's another question that I have. Am I correct in reading the autopsy report and seeing that his body was already in stages of rigor mortis? Um, did they ever give a reason why, if this happened and he was found a day later, how he was already in stages of rigor? My understanding is rigor takes at least between 25 to 48 hours to start showing signs. So how did we get there?
Dr. Kraft was all over the place in her deposition. And she described, well, she initially says he was in first stage decomposition, which would be expected. But then later on in her autopsy, deposition, she kept saying, well, what you see, you don't see blood. What you see is purge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have untrained eyes. And all the other people, first responders, apparently they have untrained eyes too because they saw blood. She sees purge. And there's the problem there. Purge
So
doesn't
explain to
happen
us
in
what
the
purge
first
is.
stage. Purge doesn't happen in the first stage of decomposition. It happens in the second stage of decomposition. Then later on in her testimony, she testified to things that would suggest stage 3 decomposition, but she had testified that he was in first stage decomposition. So she was all over the place. That's how we got there with that. And as far as the way his body looked, well, the reason that his appearance changed unnaturally between the time they took him out of the gym and the time the body was received by the funeral home, according to Mr. Johnson, when he went to see Kendrick and identify the body, and they opened up the cold chamber, warm air came out. Yeah, warm air.
Wait. So when he went to go identify the body at the medical examiners, is
No,
his
in Valdosta still. This is at the Valdosta GBI crime lab. It hadn't gone to the GBI yet. Yeah, this was within the first 48 hours or so. And yeah, warm air came out.
So, oh my goodness. So I'm wanting to make sure I'm clear on what's happening here, right? Because if it's what I think it is, what you're saying, but I want to make sure I'm clear. So
unnatural decomposition.
As in purposefully not preserving the remains for whatever reason.
Not just purposely not preserving,
escalating,
but intentionally
speeding it up.
Indeed.
Oh gosh.
That's what that was suggesting. Yeah.
So tell me, in theory, let's just say if we are speaking hypothetically, or if we are going to entertain that theory, why would someone do that? Like, what would be the reason, or what would they stand to gain behind speeding up decomposition? Or better yet, let me frame that differently. How would speeding up decomposition affect the case?
Well, they could put in writing, well, we got rid of the internal organs because they had advanced decomposition.
Okay, gotcha.
That would explain why the sheriff said, hey, the medical examiner got rid of these because there was advanced decomposition. But the medical examiner has pictures in her, the pictures that they took at the GBI examination, and it clearly shows the internal organs were not decomposed. They didn't have advanced decomposition. This was a feeble attempt by the sheriff's department and law enforcement to speed up the decomposition of these internal organs, and they couldn't do it fast enough. It didn't work.
Because if they had the internal organs, potentially it would have shown the trauma, which would have not been explainable by a fall through a mat. Am I correct?
Correct. And here's another one for you. The GBI examination, there's a autopsy photo with its front open, and clearly there's all types of trauma and damage to this right side of his body where the carotid artery was ruptured, right through there. It's all down in there and it's visible. And then over here, you can see the rest of his internal organs are in perfect tact.
Well, I think we need to ask the question that I know many of the viewers are going to ask. And that is, if all of this is so clearly shown, why was the family not made aware of this? Or if they were, how come they didn't make the public aware of this?
Bingo. That's an excellent question.
The family was shocked. Well, when Kenneth, Brother Johnson, when he saw Kendrick, he was shocked. And then when they received the body, he was even more shocked because the appearance had even changed drastically. The reason the family wasn't made aware, well, we can speculate why they weren't made aware. What the evidence and everything else would suggest is that it was just pure corruption and a cover-up. It's that simple.
So I want to talk a little bit because you've mentioned quite a few times this medical examiner, and you've said how she was all over the place with this or this changed and that changed. And I want to be clear that I've read through a lot of the documents about the case, and so has Griggs, as well as, just our team has gone through them a lot. So I can attest to the fact that when you say we're not speculating this was all over the place, this was all over the place. So I want to talk a little bit about, because I feel like, me personally, there were some people whose responsibility it was to do an unbiased job, just get their job done. And there were a lot of people who, like you said, were all over the place. There was just some chaos and even some drama surrounding whether it's the medical examiners or whoever was involved. I feel like there are so many people who negatively impacted the outcome of this case. So just to your knowledge, because you've mentioned the medical examiners, if we can just talk about that for a little bit.
What would you like to know about the medical examiner's report?
So you've mentioned that there were a lot of anomalies in her case. Like, for one, there's multiple medical examiners involved, right?
There's two.
Okay. So let's talk about, for one, how we got there, because if you're a novice like me into true crime, we might not understand why do we have multiple medical examiners going on. And also this one particular medical examiner, when you say, oh, she changed this, she changed that, I want to know ultimately, like, where did that go and how did that affect the case, her being involved?
The case essentially had a predetermined outcome from the start. And all of this shifting is because the stories just don't add up. And when you invent a story, it's going to change as things come out. So the state medical examiner had to craft her story, change her story, edit, modify, whatever, so that they could come to this predetermined outcome. The family, of course, look at their son, and they waited months for this medical examiner's report to come out. And when it finally comes out, it's totally inconsistent with what their eyes saw. So they had Kendrick, they went to court, they got a court order and exhumed his body and had an independent autopsy. Now, here's the catch with this. Here's another factor. The autopsy report was supposed to have been completed and given to the family long time ago. The cause of death was supposed to be on the death certificate and given to the funeral director under Georgia state law. None of that happened. So the family had they were trusting that these unbiased people, these people who were just supposed to do their job, they were trusting that they were going to do their job accordingly. So they didn't have a reason to get the independent autopsy before putting Kendrick's body in the ground. This was deliberate by the state so that they could put his body in the ground, and most people couldn't afford the $20,000 to go through that process to get it exhumed. And they did that twice. Yeah, they did it twice. So these are things where you see a system, a process at work where they make it financially impossible for you to fight their corruption.
So my next question, as far as the two, the forensics reports and the two medical examiners, were there differences in the reports that you know of? And let's talk about what the differences are, or the biggest differences.
They were complete opposites. The biggest difference is the state medical examiner said that there were no significant injuries noted. That there were, some skin slippage here, whatever, but no significant injuries. That's the finding. The forensic William Anderson, Dr. Anderson, the independent autopsy, of course, found and took pictures of, ruptured carotid artery, blunt force trauma, non-accidental. So they
Let
were
me
complete opposites.
let me ask this, and I think it's incumbent for the family. We've talked a lot about the medical investigation. We've talked about what is been reported by law enforcement, and then of course how it's been contradicted. But can you paint a picture up for us of who Kendrick was in life, so that people can kind of get a feel for who the 17-year-old that the family is fighting for, the true nature of what happened to him to come out? Who was Kendrick Johnson?
Well, I didn't know Kendrick. I did not know Kendrick personally. But through the family's eyes, through his grandmother's eyes, his parents, his siblings, um, he was a great athlete, three-sport athlete. Apparently, he had the grades to play. Three sports, you got to have at least, C average, right? So, he was above average student. And as you can see, he was very, he just kind of happy-go-lucky, just kind of quiet. Maybe what would you call it? I wouldn't call him a introvert, because he was. There's videos of him where he's just having fun with kids in the gym or his sibling family. Doing what he's supposed to do. Never absent from class. Had no enemies. That's it. He was the starter, and most likely Florida State would have been recruiting him. But once he died, his backup became the starter, and Florida State recruited that person along with Georgia, 5-star recruit.
Wow. And so, because of the outcry by the family, this case garnered national attention and still garners the attention of a large majority of the African American community and allies of the African American community. But kind of talk about what the family has had to go through to get attention on this case, to ultimately try to get it to where it needs to be, and that's some semblance of accountability.
They've had to go to hell and back a couple of times. It's affected them physically, mentally, every aspect of their lives. What they've had to go through to get it to where it is today, we've had to, wake it up from the dead, in essence. After we got the pictures of the stun gun, once we saw that, well, we got foul play. We already know what the facial pictures are. We already know that they're just lying about it. But now let's talk about these stun gun entries. So went ahead and got the first lawsuit in September 19, 2023. Prior to that, the family and myself, we spent the entire summer in 2023 trying to find an attorney to take the case. Could not find one in the entire state of Georgia, and we could not find one who was licensed in the state of Georgia and may live in Georgia or Alabama or Florida. And each and every one came up with some type of an excuse. Everything from, now these are people who attorneys who advertise themselves as civil rights attorneys. Every excuse from, I don't think I have the skills to do this, to take this case, to one of Georgia's alleged or so-called up-and-coming stars. Oh, I did my due diligence, and this case has been litigated to the ends of the earth, and a judge is going to throw this out and laugh you out the courtroom kind of thing. So they went pro se and scorched the earth.
I have a question for you, especially speaking of scorched earth. That's such an interesting thing that you said, because I've been thinking as far as the family and where we are now. Like I believe it's his mom posting on social media to where she's just like, you know what? I'm going to do whatever I can to get justice for my baby. And those are the exact words I use, is scorched earth. But I have to be
That was
honest
our
and say,
strategy from September 19 on, was we're going to scorch the earth. That was a actual strategy, and we're going to make everything a big deal. Burn
so
it
let's
down.
talk strategy as far as the photos, because I do want to ask that, because some of these photos, the public is just now seeing or being made aware of. You know, I haven't seen them released in the media. You know, normally when there is a case like this, it's all over the place out the gate, right? So I'm curious, or I think a lot of our listeners would probably wonder, like, especially when you're talking attorneys, like I would feel like all the stories we were told, if we had seen those photos, I don't feel like there would have been any way to deny what happened or to convince anybody that it was asphyxiation when we saw those photos. So to your knowledge, if you know at all, like what was the strategy behind the photos, like or what happened with the photos? Why are we just now seeing those photos?
People in power and influence suppress everything. There was a complete breakdown in all governmental norms and processes and checks and balances. And that's not mine. We ran the actual scenario through AI, and AI said this was a complete breakdown in government from top to bottom. It's more than a medical examiner, but a complete breakdown in government.
So has the family had these photos the entire time though? And what made them want to put them out now?
The
Like
family's been
if they
putting
were suppressed, what changed?
no, I didn't say that. I said the government suppressed. The family's been putting these out since
Oh,
since
so
the
they've been
beginning.
trying and just didn't have the reach.
Look, the all, if you go back to 2014, it's all over the Kendrick Johnson memorial page, the Real Justice Now page. Real Justice Now has this whole thing outlined 2014. That's how we went back just recently and stumbled across Officer Adams' report, where he said Kendrick, or the only identifiable thing on Kendrick was his hair. Was that we posted that stuff 11 years ago, 12 years ago, forgot about it because it's so much stuff that has happened. And I mean, there's so much to this. And so then these things have, you put these things out so you do create a paper trail and you can come back to it. And so we made a very good point. We documented this thing to the hill, and it's coming out now because, well, we're bringing it back, scorched earth.
And so let me jump in there for a moment. So the actual photos that are now starting to circulate, those were placed out back when 2014,
2013, 2014, 2015. Yes.
Oh wow.
Jackie, when she posted the picture of Kendrick's back, with it all chopped up, butchered. And I remember I posted it on one of the pages. There was a bunch of pages, and it went viral. It went over 100,000 views within an hour or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then in time, it just everything fades
Dies
away.
down.
They closed the investigation. This U.S. attorney steps down, another one gets the case, they step down, no charges, and then here comes the third one, shuts it down. Well, we can't charge anyone. And that's it.
So I think this is a good segue to ask you, because you said, you put it out, things fizzle down, you guys are still fighting, you're going scorched earth. So here we like, here we like to say that it's never too late for justice. Even justice delayed is still justice, right? So with you being involved and you being an advocate for the family, do you still feel at this point that there is an option to get justice for his family? And what does that look like? Like, what are next steps?
So all three, they have 3 lawsuits in federal court. They're all active in essence. This judge dismissed 2 of them, one before she got sued and one after she got sued. The newest one, the one, the nation just saw, the $10 billion one, well, that's just getting going. And the defendants there, they have 60 days to file an answer under Rule 8 and Rule 12. So and the other 2 are going to be appealed. The 11th Circuit already sent the first case back to the district court, and they dismissed it again without due process. And that was with a whole lot less evidence and things on the record than they have now. So there's no way in hell that this dismissal will survive the appellate process. It's coming back to the district court, hands down. These judges will not survive this lawsuit, hands down, because there's 5 judges on the appellate court who shirked their duties, misprision of felony, and did not hold this judge accountable when it became very clear that this judge was supposed to be held accountable under the canons and under federal statutes. So now you've got other judges on a higher court that could face disciplinary actions and or removal. They can be impeached because a felony is an impeachment offense for a federal judge.
So that's what we're looking at now as far as justice, is holding the judges accountable for failing to essentially give justice in the previous cases.
The family wants everyone, everywhere held accountable, top to bottom, judges, lawyers, the school board, the sheriff, both sheriffs, the deputies, the investigators involved, and of course, whoever the assailants were. Everyone, because everyone played a part in this. Not one person. This was a complete breakdown in the governmental norms and procedures, due process, everything as you know it failed during this account. Everything.
So let me ask you this. You said there are 3 active cases. Of course, the world saw the $10 billion lawsuit that was filed recently, and the other one that it went up to the 11th Circuit and was sent back down, or is it at the 11th Circuit and then going to be appealed to the United States Supreme Court? Just want to make sure we'll understand the procedural posture of those cases.
Okay, so there was a $1 billion lawsuit that was filed on September 19, 2023. That was the first lawsuit bringing this case back into the public eye. And it made national headlines there. That case was dismissed without due process by the Chief Judge May. She hadn't made Chief Judge yet, but she was the presiding judge. She dismissed the case without having them answer it. All of the GBI's claim of sovereign immunity did not survive the appeal, right? So the appeals court did not affirm the district court's finding that the GBI had sovereign immunity.
Mhm.
So what normally should happen is they shouldn't be able to make that argument again because it wasn't strong enough to survive the first time. So then this case got dismissed a second time, and that's the one that in response. So it's not going to survive. It didn't survive. The dismissal was not affirmed the first time. It's certainly not going to get affirmed this time, especially with that, skull fracture and everything else that's come out since then. The shoe prints on his body, tread marks on his body, the ripped skin on his side. It's just way too much evidence now.
Mhm.
And so those are coming back. There was a third case. There was a case against the Department of Public Health to cause them to come in to amend the complaint based on the actual findings, the evidence, and the autopsy report from a forensic pathologist. And the Department of Public Health refused to change it, even though state law mandates it. So there's a lawsuit for that. And then there's this other lawsuit. So these aren't going away, not by any stretch of it. I mean, they've been in the court for over 2.5 years. They've never answered anything under the rules. They had 21 days to answer under Rule 12, or it should have been default judgment. And you can't stall and have a motion to stay in place for 2 years based on just because we said so. You got to have cause.
Yeah. And so, with those actions still pending legally, how can non-lawyers and citizens who've heard this story get involved to assist in amplifying and hopefully getting it to a point where, because from my understanding of the procedural posture, this case has never been tried in front of a jury where these facts could be presented. So how can regular ordinary citizens get engaged to hopefully get that to that point?
The best way right now, where it is right now, with the U.S. Attorney General involved, call the Department of Justice, send emails, text message, contact them, and demand a special prosecutor. Call President Trump and have him ask, demand, request that he appoint a special prosecutor to investigate. But the case, it has to be opened criminally. None of this is the true justice is going to come when they have a full and fair investigation, and when the Johnsons have full and fair opportunity to litigate. They have special prosecutors and different resources available to them that could get to the bottom of this overnight. Chief Judge John T. Folks Jr. down in Tennessee is arguably one of the best prosecutors this country has ever known. And if they appoint him, he's down in the South his whole life. He knows how to move down there. He's gotten convictions on the biggest cases that the federal government, state, and district attorney levels, he'll get to the bottom of it. You just got to have the process started by the people that can do it. And that today, that's the Attorney General and the President. Blow up the phone lines.
And has the family reached out to Attorney General Bondi and President Trump with that particular ask, or are they asking citizens to assist them in that request?
We've done both. Well, we've done both in the past, not with President Trump, with President Biden. We've had the public push. During the President Obama, supposedly Eric Holder was giving him weekly updates, which is why it makes it hard for me to believe that someone very high up in that organization, that administration, was not agreeable to this. I totally believe someone very high in the Obama administration was agreeable, possibly the president himself. And what we expected with this $10 billion lawsuit, knowing how this process works, is that Pam Bondi was going to get the summons and that she is going to have to update President Trump at some point in one of their daily meetings. That a United States District Court itself is now being sued along with 2 federal judges for $10 billion.
Okay. And so, typically on this particular podcast, and we're honored to have this particular case as one of the first on the podcast, we want to leave the community with an action item. And so, am I correct in saying that the action item here should be to reach out to the Justice Department, specifically the Attorney General herself and the current sitting President of the United States, to demand that the case be reopened and prosecuted, or
That is absolutely correct.
okay, well,
Absolutely.
could you make that call to the listeners? I know they're listening, and this is the whole purpose of the podcast, to give families that platform to make that ask and hopefully secure justice.
Well, to everybody out there in podcast land, the Kendrick Johnson family is in dire need of as much assistance from the public, getting the attention of all of these bureaucrats over there in Washington, D.C. to do their job. And the public has been very helpful in the past. Kendrick Johnson warriors all across the country, I want to thank you for your steadfastness, because they haven't done this alone. There's tens of thousands of people. I'll even go out and say over hundreds of thousands all across this country. And whenever the Johnsons need them and call on them, they answer. And so to anyone who hasn't been involved with any of those actions, we need your help too. Everyone's voice needs to be heard. And this whole thing has been about giving the Johnsons a voice, because their voice was taken from them. That can happen to any of us. It can happen to you. It can happen to me. It's very simple for them to do this. You see how they've done this. So these calls are very important. And now that everyone's attention is on this, it's more important now than ever to make this push and scorch the earth, shut down the phone lines. Let's shut down the phone lines. Let's shut them down.
Well, I thank you for coming onto the podcast, and I echo the call. This is one of those cases where we're going to need every single member who's been fighting for justice for Kendrick Johnson for years to make that call. And we know that the Attorney General is listening, and that we're hopeful that she will heed the call of this family, because it's going to take the federal government to step in for this situation
Absolutely.
resolved the appropriate way. Kiandria, do you have any last words or parting thoughts on this particular case and how we can continue to help to amplify it?
I want to continue to encourage people to remember who he was, that he was a person, he was an athlete, he was a child, not just somebody's child, he was a literal minor.
Minor.
And I want to encourage us to continue to think about these cases, not just a case, but as humans. He was a person. There's so much chaos going on in the world right now that I think eventually some of these people, they become a headline, they become a title, they become a hashtag, they become a clip, they become buzzwords. And I want us to make sure we're not doing that. I want us to make sure we are seeing him as a human, because we have to fight for each other as humans. I'm a mom, I have a Black son. And that's why it touches me the way it does, because it, like you said, it can happen to any of us. So my ask would be, of course, we want to be active. Of course, we want to fight. We want to continue to fight because it's never too late for justice. But I want us to remember that we are fighting for a person. We're not just fighting the system. This is not a football game. We're fighting for a person. We are fighting for a family who needs justice, and we are fighting for somebody's child.
And so I just want to again thank Jonathan Burris for coming on to the show to amplify the call for justice for Kendrick Johnson. I want to thank everybody that's tuned in. And I want to make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe so that we can get justice for each and every one of these families. But most importantly, for the Kendrick Johnson family, we want you to reach out to the Attorney General. We want you to reach out to the current President of the United States and demand justice for Kendrick Johnson, because this is important. This could happen to anyone. A 17-year-old lost his life, and now we are dealing with the ramifications of justice not fulfilled. And so I want to make sure you guys understand that the purpose of this platform is to amplify the call of families. This family is speaking out. This family is calling on your assistance, and we know that you can be of assistance and get justice. So we want to thank you, and we're going to toss it out. Justice for Kendrick Johnson.
What do you want?
Every headline fades. Every news cycle moves on. For the families, it never ends. And the fight for accountability continues. This is not about clicks. This is not about controversy. This is about the truth. The names that deserves justice. We are reopening and examining the files and the facts. Nothing more and nothing less. We're going to ask questions that people dare to ask. Because justice delayed does not mean justice denied.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Can't fail me.
You don't get it!
This is Justice for